what are some of the biggest challenges in engineering and construction today, and how do you navigate kind of the hurdles of integrating a new technology while, balancing that innovation versus the practicality of engineering?
The biggest challenge that the industry has, and I think it's just only going to become more acute as the velocity with which solutions come to the market, is the capacity for a firm or for the industry as a whole to consume those new technologies. And it's not literally just buy it and start using it. It's like all of the processes that need to be changed and documented and trained. There's really so much capacity a firm, and from a change management standpoint, can handle.
Did you know that less than 1% of the engineering and construction industry's revenue is invested in research and development? Despite being a $1 trillion industry, civil engineering has been slow to embrace innovation, often relying on outdated methods and resisting technological change. They're scared. Well, in today's episode, I'll be talking with Landon Messel, licensed professional engineer, CEO and founder of SiteMarker, about bridging the gap between civil engineering and technology. We'll talk about the role in geospatial data in construction and the challenges of driving innovation in an industry hesitant to change. He's also going to share insights on building a strong company culture, leading through challenges, and leveraging technology to boost efficiency. If you're a civil engineering professional and you're looking to embrace technology and future-proof your career and maybe your organization, this is a conversation that you won't want to miss. I'm your host, Anthony Fasano, and this is the Civil Engineering CEO Show. All right, now I'd like to welcome my guest onto the show for today. Landon Messel is a licensed professional engineer. He is the CEO and founder of SiteMarker. Landon, welcome to the Civil Engineering CEO Show.
Man, excited to be here. I appreciate you having me, Anthony.
Absolutely. So, Landon, maybe you can start off by telling our viewers a little bit about yourself, your company, and what it is that you do on a daily basis.
Yeah. So again, licensed civil engineer here based in the Carolinas, and got a unique background, and got 2 degrees. One's in plant sciences from the University of Tennessee and a civil engineering degree. Quickly gravitated to the software side of engineering and became an expert inside of Civil 3D. That turned itself into a role as director of innovation at an engineering and land planning firm, and ultimately ended up coming up with an idea in that innovation department, spinning it out. So now I play the role of CEO and founder of a company. So my daily life looks like setting up sales processes and working with the product team and just scaling a company. So wear a lot of hats.
Interesting. So, like you said, you have a unique background that spans, plant sciences, civil engineering, software, project management. Talk a little bit about how all these different experiences have kind of shaped your approach in founding and kind of leading SiteMarker.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, ironically, a lot of the ideas and the foundation of SiteMarker came from my time in the golf industry. We were prepping for the 2011 PGA Championship at the Ocean Course. We spent 3 days looking for a valve on the right side of number 6. And I remember thinking, man, it'd be really nice to be able to locate this after we find it again. And so, and just really, if you can think about context, trying to get teams to go out to the course and do certain things, being able to explain to them specifically where you were and what you were looking at was a challenge I found kind of in my early career in the golf industry. Fast forward as an engineer, particularly for land planning firms that are doing master plan communities, single family residential, industrial, where we're working on large pieces of land. That same context is really critical. We're out on site, whether it's from due diligence, we're collecting information before we go into design, to maybe being in construction and trying to take a specific thing across the finish line. We often find ourselves going back out to the site to recommunicate it, answering phone calls, to really provide context to exactly where you were and what you saw.
That's interesting. And I think that that's a real important kind of career lesson for people, is that every experience you have is building you up for kind of your next experience, right? I mean, I know a lot of civil engineers that graduated as civil engineers, but they're either not doing civil engineering today, or they're in the industry in a different capacity, right? Yeah. And even for me, I mean, I graduated as a civil engineer. I have a master's in civil engineering, but now I do leadership training, project management training for civil engineering companies. But my background allows me to be able to do that and understand where they're coming from. And so, the civil engineering is a big industry. And I tell people all the time, there'll be new jobs in civil engineering tomorrow that aren't here today because of the technology and everything that's going on. So your education is just going to continue to bolster and help you, and you can get creative in what you're actually doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I mean, from an engineering standpoint, I've got three daughters, and I would highly encourage really anyone to evaluate engineering as a degree, whether that's the career you go into or not, because I think it really instills into you this rigor of thought to evaluate a problem and solve it. And that translates to really anything.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, really, I tell people this all the time. It's kind of the mindset that that degree puts you in terms of being able to solve problems and, think in different directions. And I tell like young people all the time that I talk to, like, listen, if you have any interest in possibly being an engineer, get the degree, because if you don't, you still have this great mindset and tool set that you can go forward with. And if you do, great, but you can't get a business degree and then go back and become an engineer, right? So, I mean,
Exactly.
I had great offers from like finance companies coming out of school, and they're like, I said, I didn't take any finance. They're like, we don't care. You took engineering. We can teach you the finance side of it.
Exactly. And it's funny, when I was training engineers on how to use AutoCAD, I really drove that back into a statics problem. I remember when the light bulb went off, and identifying your unknowns, drawing that diagram cleanly, and then working the problem below it is so relevant to working in AutoCAD with layer state management, and just like take all the information that's not relevant, get rid of it. So freeze those layers, and understand the problem and focus on it. I think, again, like that simple task of trying to solve a statics problem just kind of resonates throughout an engineering career.
Yeah, no, for sure. I've used it myself. It's a good example and a good analogy. So let's talk civil engineering. So in your opinion, what are some of the biggest challenges in engineering and construction today, and how do you navigate kind of the hurdles of integrating a new technology while, balancing that innovation versus the practicality of engineering?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge that the industry has, and I think it's just only going to become more acute as the velocity with which solutions come to the market, is the capacity for a firm or for the industry as a whole to consume those new technologies. And it's not literally just buy it and start using it. It's like all of the processes that need to be changed and documented and trained. There's really so much capacity a firm, and from a change management standpoint, can handle in a certain period of time, particularly with the workload where it's at. I mean, we know that civil engineers, there's not enough engineers being graduating. And so, there's more work to be done by less people. And how do you manage change along with executing deliverables and getting that stuff to your clients? So, I think that the easiest, so I mean, like for instance, like we've Autodesk and some of these larger companies, they've got software solutions that are quite complex. They're solving very complex problems for that matter. So I'm not saying they're unnecessarily complex, but the ramp to get somebody spun up in, say, a civil 3D is months, if not years, in some extent. And I believe that one of the critical paths for innovation and for the AEC industry as a whole to generate more velocity and innovation is to creating tools that are super easy to use that complement existing workflows, such that it's not moving somebody's cheese. You're just kind of complementing what they're already doing, but you're making it easier.
Yeah, it's a great point. There's a ramp up, there's a mindset, there's a lot that goes into adopting something new, which we'll talk about in a minute, that the easier that we can make it for professionals to get more productive, right? And to use something, if it's like latched onto something they're already using, is just going to facilitate that process, which I think is really important, because one of the challenges that we know exists is just a lack of engineers and a lack of consulting professionals, which is why I talk to CEOs all the time, and they're like, our problem right now is we can't either keep enough people or hire enough people to do the work, which is why I think some of these tools are even more important, because if you can improve your workflows, that can help you to some degree. But I think before we talk a little bit about adoption, Landon, this would be a good point just for context purposes. If you can tell our audience a little bit about SiteMarker, I want them to understand kind of what you built and what you thought going into that before I start to ask you about technology
Yeah.
more
Well,
depth.
for sure. So some of the processes that we were doing as a civil engineer from the beginning of a project, which I will point out when it comes to land development, and by land development, I mean really kind of construction of any type, but the evaluation of a piece of property, understanding if the product that an owner wants to put on it can fit, getting it permitted, constructing it, and then closing it out. That's a very long time frame. And civil engineers, I think specifically, are affected by that more than most because we're the first people in, we're the first stakeholders in, and we're the last ones out. We're part of that closeout process. For example, residential neighborhoods that they go into a 2 to 3 year warranty period until they're closed out, and that becomes a very hard story to consolidate and create a thread when it comes to understanding what happened out on site. And so some of the tools that we currently use without SiteMarker are things like Google Maps or Google Earth. We'll export AutoCAD line work to understand kind of where we are on site, such that when we're walking around on Greenland or a raw piece of land, we're collecting information that's relevant when we get back to the office. But we take photos on our phone, handwritten notes, and then we kind of need to like fumble our way through kind of either creating punch lists or coming back to the office and say, hey, this is what I saw on site. And so really SiteMarker, kind of hearkening back to this complementing existing processes,
Right.
we're going to take existing processes that I just explained and put them in a single platform that are super easy to use, such that and I say easy, that's kind of cliche. Anybody can sit on this side of the computer and say that product's easy to use, but I think it's familiar is what I want to say. It's if you know how to send a text message with a photo in it, well, you know how to collect data in the field. If you know how to go find a restaurant in a city you've never been to, you've used the map and you're kind of familiar with using a map.
Right.
If you've used Google Earth, then you kind of know what a KMZ is and being able to walk around line work. So, and that's where I think like we go to some of these conferences and I see these robots walking around like doing inspections, and I'm like, man, we just need like simpler tools. We need like more fundamental solutions than say, completely automating the civil 3D, stormwater pipe design process. Like give us
Right.
tools that work for us today, and then we can start to more easily structure data and move forward.
Yeah, I think that's great. And that's exactly why I asked you, because I know you're building on top of these existing, tools that they can use. And, we're going through that at EMI right now because we're exploring like creating this AEC PM, like premium content stream. And I told our team, I said, listen, I love the idea of it, but they have to be able to like go into Spotify where they already live and get this stream. Like it can't be something that they have to go to and find and do something new because it's just not going to happen. And so that kind of brings me to the next question that I want to talk to you about, which is, a lot of civil engineering professionals, maybe even firms, kind of resist adopting new technology. I think for some of the reasons that you mentioned, but, how do you think that engineers, construction professionals, their organizations can kind of become more tech forward?
It's certainly, I think, it starts at the leadership. I think in any type of adopting new technology, it really needs to be a top down kind of mentality. And I think what we're going to see as the workforce gets younger or is replaced, you're going to see pressure from the bottom as well. But we've seen the best adoption, the most value gleamed out of companies and clients that have strong leadership, who enforce processes, that believe that there's an easier way and a better way to collect information and deliver products to their clients.
Yeah. And I think we're going through here as we talk through these different things with Landon is kind of, you're seeing steps. The first step being find a tool that builds off of what you already have. When you find that tool, make sure the leadership can get bought in on it, right? And lead that initiative to be able to adopt it. And these work together, because if it's a tool that you can build off of something you're already using, it's going to be easier for leadership to say, hey, we already have Google Maps. We can build right on top of it this other tool to make our teams more productive, right?
Yeah.
So, as you can see, kind of some of these points that we're walking through are building on each other. And I do think that's really important that you do have the leadership involved. A lot of these companies that we work with, not exactly the same thing, but somewhat of an analogy when we're building like a custom PM training program for them. A lot of them are like, hey, I like to go to this boot camp, or I like to do this other thing. So it's something that we're trying to convince them to do. And usually we get like the leadership or like a PM committee that they have in house to get on board and say, hey, we need this because we need to drive more consistency in our project management efforts across the company. Then people will start to get behind it. You got to have their leadership get behind it and put them in the right position. So
yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think it may have been one of your podcasts, to be honest with you. I saw a stat, likely I think came out of the McKinsey report, was 4% of data inside the AEC industry is structured and accessible, which seems mind blowing. But I think that as we try to tackle collecting better data and accessing it, we're not going to pull people out of a spreadsheet and then put them in a Ferrari like a Procore or an ACC. Like that's a huge jump. There's a lot of technical debt that is required there. And so being able to start to collect and organize information in sections of your company is a really great springboard into then kind of putting full systems into place.
Yeah. I'm just laughing because I'm thinking of my kids, my teenagers who are like having to teach me like, Dad, you got to use Snapchat to communicate with us. And I'm like, first of all, I don't know what that is. So then there's a learning curve, there's a buy-in process, and then you start one and you have to go to another. But yeah, I mean, it's with all technology, but in what we're doing in civil engineering, I mean, obviously it can be game changing on the multi-million-dollar or billion-dollar projects that we're working on. If you can make small improvements, it's going to be a big win. So Landon, let's talk a little bit about geospatial data. How is geospatial data influencing construction and civil engineering decision-making today from what you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of, again, going and hearkening back to that main problem that engineers have, particularly anyone working on a large space. But look, with that being said, we could think of like people that work in the forestry department or anybody who's managing very large spaces. There's this fundamental problem. Where am I? Documenting what I saw and then telling someone else where I was and what I saw. And those three pillars right there are really what SiteMarker is founded on, and they're critical to taking things across the finish line. I think that if you look at what's happening with 5G and the cellular networks and certainly, some of these low orbit cellular networks that are going up, our access to a lot of different tools and certainly geospatial location is already here. And I believe that SiteMarker is kind of on the front end of saying, hey, not only are we going to go collect data super easily, but we can collect all of our data with relevance to where we were. And so we're looking at here, and there's, like I said, there's a lot of data that we don't know. From an ROI standpoint, it's kind of hard to point out, how many man hours are saved. But what ends up happening is people go out to the field, they see something, they come back to the office, they make a few phone calls, and oftentimes you got to go back out there to re-walk the site to point out what's happening. And so that's not any kind of data point that any firms are tracking at this point. But I think that there's this anchor that it kind of like is around our neck from a construction administration standpoint, particularly for civil engineering firms, of like recommunicating what could so easily be consolidated into a location, a photo, a note, and a status to say, hey, there's really no excuse for me to have to meet you back out on site because I'm going to walk you straight to it.
Yeah, that's great. Again, when we're talking about these things, we can just imagine them on multi-million-dollar projects, right? And like the benefit that provides. Again, we know that we're talking about a step up to be able to do it effectively and what it will take to get into it. But I think the reason that people are moving in that direction is because when you make small improvements on large projects, they end up being really large improvements in the long run, which is why, we focus on this a lot.
I mean, absolutely. And I think that, we've even seen some pretty big savings in specific use cases where, part of one of our features is the ability to walk around on a PDF. Now, there's like a lot of different technology out there that'll kind of track your relevant location on a document, such as says, here I am. And then it just kind of follows a path. We're actually a map first. So we place the PDF in the world and you can walk around on the document. And we've seen examples where we've been able to identify that the contractor was on the wrong set of plans because I'm on this PDF and I can see my location on where the valve should be and it's over there. And, being able to like communicate at that level, I think is super critical. And so like the upside on that, to your point, on very large projects is massive.
Massive. Yeah, massive. And that's why, and I think that's why you're hearing more and more about tech and tech conferences and civil engineering, right? And tech movements because of that. Now, I will say that, there is a gap still, of course, civil engineering and emerging technologies. We're getting better. What have you found in terms of effective strategies and kind of bridging that gap between civil engineering and emerging technologies? And how do you kind of see the relationship, evolving over the next 10 years?
Maybe I'll start at 10 years and work backwards. I think
Yeah.
that so much of what we do will be commoditized, with agents, and kind of just the movement of where AI is going. There's so many things that we do as civil engineers, it'll just become a commodity. And I think there's going to be certainly an instance where the companies that adopt it first will kind of, A, they'll have to cut their teeth on it, but B, they may be on the front end of some of the profitability of that. But ultimately, everyone's going to need to lean back into relationships. The firm that SiteMarker was spun out of is one of the top in the Carolinas, and the primary thing that we hear from the clients is that it's because of the relationships. And the reality of the matter is that we can have all the technology in the world, but we're still going to need to navigate complex permitting requirements and relationships, and making sure, as purveyors of the built environment, like we're not just going to go hand everything over to technology and then just hope that it builds it like, the constituents want. So I think there's always going to be this human element of design and engineering that if anything, AI and technology is actually going to end up putting on a pedestal to be the most important thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's so important. I mean, civil engineering has always been a relationship, driven industry, and I think I agree with you. I think it will continue to be, and I think that over time, people will get more comfortable with the emerging technologies. But I think it goes back to everything you've talked about so far, which is they need to, wade their way into the pool. They need to build on something they already have. They need to get leadership involved. And as they start to do that, like 10 years from now, operations and workflows can look highly different and highly more productive and effective. And I do believe that, the equation that we struggle with today is a lot of work, not enough people to do it in civil engineering. And I do believe that technology is part of the solution to that equation.
Yep.
As people get more comfortable with it and they figure out what's the right fit for them in their processes.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, if you think about balancing an equation, I do think technology is on one side of the equation, and it's going to help us be able to meet the need of development. I don't think we'll ever get to the point where people are losing jobs, because I think there's just too much work out there forever to do that. I just think, and it is well documented to this point, there's just going to be a ton of work that will be done much faster at a higher quality that we just won't end up having to spend time QCing, if that makes any sense. But
yeah, no, I think it will make processes better. And I agree with you. There's so much work to come. There is so much work today and so much work coming beyond that, I think it's an exciting time to be involved in the industry, and some of the technology makes it even more exciting to me. So.
Absolutely.
All right. So for the last few questions, I'm going to switch gears a little bit, because as an entrepreneur myself, I got to ask you some questions about building the business, building SiteMarker, and how it's going. So the first thing I want to ask you about is, what would you say are some of the key values or principles that you like to emphasize to kind of create a strong company culture, which we know is so important?
Yeah, I think, first of all, living it and not just saying it, and I think I learned this as my time as an engineer working at the firms, is I've seen so many times young engineers come into the industry and not have a purpose outside of work, and then work became their entire purpose, and really kind of the entire value system, and whether they were those needs were getting met in their life really became the responsibility of direct reports and team leaders. And I think that one of the things I really instill into SiteMarker and our team here is we have got to have goals outside of work. Those are candidly more important than what we're doing. And chasing those efforts, whether it's spending more time with your family, becoming a single handicapped golfer, doing another Ironman. Those are things that fuel me to execute at the highest level every single day. So I first and foremost make sure you know what you want to do, where you want to do it. If I'm talking to students that are about to graduate, and focus on that, and really everything inside your professional career will start to really line up, I think.
Yeah, I love that. I love that philosophy. That's been something that I also believe in. When I was way back in the corporate world, when I was working there, I felt like a lot of times it was the employees exist to help the company achieve their goals. When I created EMI, I tried to flip that around and say, what if the company were to exist to help the employees reach their personal goals? You know, whether
Yep.
it's financial goals or, like you said, physical goals or milestones in their life. And so we're always trying to talk to people here about what do you want to do outside of work? What goals do you want to achieve? How can we help you do that? And oftentimes what's cool is you can link people up within the company that have the same personal goals,
Yep.
which creates some cool partnerships, you know,
Oh,
where
for
they can,
sure.
you
And
know, it's,
honestly, it creates synergies outside of work that just end up kind of like further manifesting within the company, and
yeah,
that work becomes better. I was listening to one of your, if you're listening to Anthony's podcast for the first time, go through that list. I was listening to the one with Blake Calvert with Core
yeah,
Consultants out in Denver. Man, just almost everything he said about entrepreneurship and growing teams, like super resonated with me.
yeah. No, Blake was good. Yeah, I agree. What would you say, Landon, has been the most unexpected challenge of running a technology driven firm, and how have you adapted to that challenge?
I would say, as an entrepreneur, maybe tying this back into the previous question, is that, well, first and foremost, let me make this statement. There's nobody better suited to solve the problems of our industry than those that live in it every day. Like, we cannot just sit here behind the desk and expect these massive software companies to solve our problems. Like, there's no one better suited to solve that, which is kind of what fueled me to say, hey, listen, like, this isn't happening and I'm going to go make this happen. And that's kind of easy to say, but executing it, I think some of the challenges there, or some of the unexpected challenges, were, as an entrepreneur, the highs and lows. Like, when you first spin this thing out, kind of you're on this roller coaster, and the highs are super high and the lows can be pretty low. And I think this effort of being like stoic in nature to say, and my daughter hates when I say this, like, hey, it's never as bad as you think it is, and it's never as good as you think it is. And I really just try to stay pretty level headed. And thankfully, the roller coaster is a little bit more like a kiddie ride at this point. But I think just staying stoic inside of places of unknown and change. So that's been the biggest challenge for sure.
Yeah, no, I can see how that. And I really like what you said about, we have to solve our own problems, right? We can't rely on, like you said, these large companies that are going to come in and do it for us because we understand them, right? We live here, we exist here, we've gone through
Yep.
the ups and downs here. And,
Yep. It
do we need help sometimes? Maybe, but I think we know the crux of the problem.
We do. And candidly, what I've always heard this, don't know if I believed it, but smaller companies are way more agile and acutely positioned to solve problems faster. Because if you could imagine 30 years of like technical architecture debt that, say, an Autodesk has to develop against, there's hierarchy of decisions. It may take them months to deliver a product that, or a feature that we could take weeks. And so I do think that the industry as a whole is going to be moving towards a best of breed solution in kind of each part. And the bigger challenge, and you've honestly seen, I think, Autodesk do this recently with their Forma platform, is there's going to be a lot smaller companies solving specific issues in the industry, and then putting their data where it needs to go inside of a Procore or an ACC or something like that.
Interesting. So, Landon, what is the last piece of advice that you would share if there's a civil engineer listening, they're really thinking about doing something different, starting their own company, based on your journey here, what's the kind of one piece of advice you might leave them with?
I would say, first of all, leave your ego at the door. I mean, I think there's certainly some part of like being bullheaded about taking an idea to the market. But if you're truly going to try to innovate and be an innovator, you need to be very open to other ideas, because it's going to do one of two things. It's either going to reinforce what you believe, or it's going to open your eyes to some other options. And I think as engineers, we're hopefully wired like that. But again, believe in yourself. I think that there's a lot of people that may just sit there and be like, well, this is my job, and they're perfectly happy with it, and that's fine. But there's some section of this group that maybe spends a lot of time looking out the window like I used to, and just thinking, what would this look like in an ideal state? And we can do it. Start with something small, like build an app inside of AutoCAD, put it in the market, and kind of understand what those challenges were. Document it, iterate on it. It's the Socratic method there. So have confidence in what you're doing, be open-minded in it, and go for it. You only live once.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I really like that piece of advice about start small. I think sometimes as entrepreneurs, we have all these ideas and we want to just get out there and start going and get through all this stuff. But, start small, get some proof of concept, right? Make sure something's working, build off of that. And then, like Landon said, it'll probably open up a lot of other doors for you, but you just got to start by getting some traction, right? And then it's going to build your confidence. It's going to help you grow. And then you kind of be off to the races.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a quote that I've always hung on to. If your dreams don't scare you, they're not big enough.
Yeah, there you go. That's a good way to sum it up. Well, once again, Landon Messel, licensed professional engineer, CEO, and founder of SiteMarker. Landon, I want to thank you so much for spending some time with us here on the Civil Engineering CEO.
Anthony, fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Well, I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Landon. He's doing some great things with SiteMarker, and he's really helping to bridge that gap in civil engineering to get us to more technology in a way that we can use it productively. If you enjoyed the conversation, please subscribe to our channel here. We do put out videos like this on a weekly basis to help engineers become better managers and leaders. I'll see you next week.